So today we're playing a 1500 Super Turbo Bounty here at Bally's. The tournament was supposed to start at 1 o'clock, but it's been a bit of a delay because it's a complete mess here today. Tons of players, which, you know, it's a good thing. It's rare that you see this at the WSOP because they're usually very well prepared. All the tournaments somehow start on time, even though they have thousands of players. But today, you know, they couldn't really prepare for this turnout. This event is one of the few that only lasts for 1 day, which is pretty cool. So you can win a bracelet in 1 day. It's only 20-minute blind, so it's going to go really fast. So we'll get down to the final table probably by tonight, and then crown a new bracelet winner later by midnight or maybe like 2 or 3 a.m. at the latest. So this tournament has a bounty format, so every player has a $500 bounty on their head, which always creates this interesting dynamic. You know, you see some players going too hard for the bounties and just trying to get a big stack so they cover everyone, because you need to cover someone to get their bounty, right? So that becomes an interesting element. Pretty uneventful 2 levels, or 2 hours actually. Played 6 levels, but yeah, blinds are moving up fast. Haven't played any big hands. I have 20,000 from 25,000 starting stack, so hopefully run a bit better after break and run it up. So we're here watching Phil, my buddy Phil Sternheimer, 12 left in the 50K Players Championship, playing 9 games. It's a lot of games to keep track of. How many blinds do you have there?
I want to save 18 or something.
Yeah, it's gotta go on. Yeah. Any pair. Yeah. But I mean, it's fine. You know, it's fine taking it down to. Yeah, it's tripled up so far a couple times, so it's in the mix. Hopefully, it makes the final table. So we just busted out of the 1500 Super Turbo Bounty, today's event. Short day. Unfortunately, my buddy busted as well in the 50K Players Championship. So not the result we wanted, but you know, it happens. And tomorrow is a new day. But before we go, I want to run you through a quick hand that I played. Not a big pot by any means, but I just want to go through my thought process and about how I think about certain decisions in game. So here we go. So open the button to 300 at 100 blind level. So 3x the big blind, we're playing 20,000, 25,000, so quite deep. The big blind defends, and the flop comes ace-9-3 with 2 clubs. And I have queen 5 of clubs. Pretty good board for my range. I'll have a lot more stronger aces than my opponent will have. So a bit of a mandatory c-bet, and my opponent checks, which I would expect him to do, especially on this board texture. So I throw out a 300 c-bet into what's now 900, 30% pot. And my opponent check raises to 1,000. So when he check raises this board, you know, 2 things. He could, you know, have a lot of draws, or he happens to have a strong hand. But since it's kind of tricky for him to have that many strong hands on this board texture that aren't sets or 2 pairs, I wouldn't expect him to check raise this board much wider than that. So pretty clear call, you know, with my flush draw, I can never fold in this spot, so I have to continue. And just hope that he has a weaker flush draw, or, you know, some sort of backdoor bluff. So I call, and the turn is another 9, so it pairs the board. And whenever this happens, you know, there's much less likely that he has a set of 9s that would now be quads. Much less likely that he has a 2 pair or a flop 2 pair that would now be a both, just because of the card removal effect. He checks to me now, which, you know, we like to see, especially when we have the flush draw, because now we can just check back and realize our equity and not have to put any more money in the pot. Of course, he will still have some quads and some boats here, so I can't just go ahead and bet my entire range. But I think in general, the 9 is pretty good for my overall range and not so good for his, because he shouldn't really check raise many 9s here if we think about it. So I check back anyway, and the river is just a blank. I believe it was like a 4 of hearts, and he checks again. And at this point, you know, I beat some of his bluffs and some of his weaker club draws. So I don't think I have a mandatory bluff here. I think my hand actually plays better as a check back. Whereas if I would have had, you know, a 6 high or an 8 high flush draw, I would have been much more incentivized to bluff here, to just to fold out, you know, queen jack of clubs, for example, in my opponent's range. But when I have a queen high flush draw, I actually beat a lot of my opponent's weaker flush draw, so I do have some showdown value. So I didn't think this was a spot where I want to go ahead and bluff. And of course, my opponent can be tricky and still have, you know, quads and boats and stuff like that. So I will get check raised here. So anyway, I check back and my opponent flips over ace jack, which I think he played really well. He went for a thin value check raise on the flop, realizing that this is a board texture where I will be c-betting a really wide portion of my range, and therefore I kind of have to defend pretty wide as well. He's very high up in his range. Ace jack on this board texture is a really strong hand, all things considered, since he didn't rebet pre-flop. So I really like his play, and then on the turn, you know, I have to shut down because I am gonna have some 9s, and I think he wants to continue with a more like polarized betting strategy on the turn and river. So I really like his play, and I think my play is fine too. But overall, I thought it was, you know, fairly interesting spot. Maybe, even though it wasn't a big pot by any means, it's just a spot that you're going to find yourself in quite often, and it's important to be able to realize when to bluff and when to shut down.